Hi, folks. Looks like we're still in section B, and we're going to be adding and subtracting rational numbers, which is just another name for fractions. Remember, a rational number has that word ratio in it, and that just means fractions. So let's get started. We're going to need common denominators to do that. In order to get a common denominator, in this case, we've got 1/10. And I prefer to change this to adding a -1/2. This is the same thing as -1/2, but it's a lot easier to work with. You'll see what I mean in a bit. We're going to multiply by a number to get the common denominator. I'm going to multiply by 5. And what I'm going to do is add my numerators now. 1 plus -5 is -4/10. Now, we could probably just leave it like that, but we should always reduce if we can. So we reduce this by dividing the numerator and denominator by 2. We get -2/5. So we put it in. I don't know whether it'll count it wrong if you don't reduce it, but we'll reduce it anyway. Now this time we have a common denominator already. So all I'm going to do is add my numerators. Be careful. Your denominator is fifths. If you take 1/5 and -4/5, you have -3/5. You don't add the numerators, the denominator, excuse me. -3/5. Oh, we've got some mixed numbers. Okay, just be careful. This -6 3/5 plus -9 3/5. We've got 6/5, and we're adding these, which gives us -15 6/5. This 6/5 is really 1 1/5. So this is equal to -16 1/5. I kind of like that answer. So we'll put it in. We have to put a space for the mixed numbers so that we can put our answer in as a mixed number. We could have done improper fractions, but it would have been a lot more work. So we've got a 7/10 plus 3/5, and you have to change the denominator by multiplying by 2. And we end up with 7 plus 6/10, or 13/10. Let's just write it that way, see if it accepts it. It should. Yeah, it likes improper fractions just like I do. Looks like we have -2.5 plus -9.5. And that's -11 and 2/2. 2 halves is really 1, so we're talking about -12. Mixed numbers again. 9 9/10 plus 6 9/10 makes 15 18/10. I'm going to do a couple of things at once. I'm going to take my 18/10 and change it to 1 8/10, which is the same as 1 4/5. And then I'm going to add that to the 15 because there really is an addition going on here. So this is 16 4/5, if you like. 16 space 4/5. Now we're doing subtraction. We've got 3 3/5, and we are going to take away 1/2. We need a common denominator, so in this case we multiply by the 5, and in this case we multiply by the 2. So we've got 3 6/10, take away 5/10, which is 3 1/10. Don't forget to put the space between your whole number and your fraction. Oh, we have a double negative here. So we've got negative 3/5. I don't like writing my negatives in the middle. I like this method a lot better. Now that double negative means that I'm really adding 8.5. Now this is the same as subtracting 3/5 away from 8.5, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my 8.5, and I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3/5. And in order to do that, we need a common denominator. Sorry, times 5. So we end up with 8 and 5/10, and we're going to subtract 6/10 from that. To do that, you're going to have to borrow. And be careful. When you borrow from this, don't automatically put a 1 in front of the 5. This happens to be 15/10, but it's just because I have a denominator of 10. If this denominator had been a 9, then I would add 9 to it. If this denominator had been a 7, right here, if this denominator had been a 7, then I would add 7 to the 5. In this case, we are going to add the 10. And 15 minus 6 is 9/10. So that's 7 9/10. Don't forget your space. We're just adding some decimals. 8.6 plus 4.5. Notice that that is 6/10 and that's 5/10. When we add them, we have a carry here. That's 13.1. Or 13 1/10. Oh, I like this one. So we've got 9/10. And we're subtracting 2/1. And we need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply by 10. But I'm also going to change this to plus and negative. It just makes my life a lot easier. So now I've got 9 plus negative 20 all over 10, because 10 is our common denominator. Well, that's negative 11/10. And I'm just going to leave it as is. It's negative 1 1/10, but I like it like that. I like improper fractions just fine. And apparently IXL likes them okay as well. We've got a negative 8.6 and a negative 5.5. Notice that I changed it from subtraction to adding the opposite. When you have like terms, in this case, both of them are negative, we add them together. Carry my 1, and that's negative 14.1. Oh, we have a double negative, so we've got 9 plus a half, which is 9.5. Double negative again. Well, a negative 2.3 and a negative 6.4. This is the same, subtracting and adding the opposite, and that is negative 8.7. Double negative gives us 7/10 plus 6, which of course is 6 7/10. Oh, I like this one. Shall we change them to decimals or shall we leave fractions? Doesn't really matter. I'll put them as decimals. That's negative 7.5. And we're talking about 9.4. I'm going to put the larger number on top. This is a subtraction in a way. It's the same as a subtraction. So 5 from 14 is 9, and 7 from 8 is 1. And the positives win. So we're talking about 1.9. Oh, there we go. Let's go ahead and go with fractions are good. I'm going to go ahead and make that 20ths. So we've got 13 20ths. and we're adding 4 and 10/20. Because 1/2 is 10/20, we just multiplied by 10, the numerator and the denominator. Notice that I have a double negative there, that's a plus. And when we add that together, we get 4 and 23/20. Now you can do mixed numbers and you can do improper fractions, but you can't do both. So again, I could make this 103/20, which is kind of ugly looking, or we can just think of the 23/20 as 1 and 3/20. And so that is 5 and 3/20. Got both of them are negative. If you like decimals, I can do decimals. This happens to be negative 0.35. And we're adding negative 5.5. And we end up with negative 5.85, which is fine. If you like decimals, more power to you. It's always nice to be able to convert, but I prefer fractions in this particular case, and you'll see why in a second. 7/20 plus negative 5 and 10/20, and we have negative 5 and 17/20, which is the same thing as that. These are the same. We'll put it in as negative 5 and 17. Let's go ahead and change the 2/5 to a decimal. What I'm doing when I change 2/5 is I'm changing it to tenths. So I'm just multiplying by 2/2, or 1, which is 4/10. And 4/10, remember, is 0.4. So we're looking at 2.9 plus, notice that I have a double negative here, that is a plus, 9.4. And we have a carry there, which is 12.3. Oops, helps by, there we go. I think I'm just going to go stick with the fraction this time. Negative 13/20 plus negative 7 and 10/20. And they're both negatives. And again, we get negative 7 and 23/20. And just like before, we have negative 8 and 3/20. Finally. All right. Oh, I like this one. This is the same as 5 2/3 minus 4, which is 1 2/3. Sometimes it's nice to be able to do subtraction. Not normally, but in this case, worked out. What? Oh, 2/5. Can't read today. Bad eyesight. Well, it's always nice to make a mistake now and again. All right, so we've got 6 1/4 and plus a negative 2/5. And we need a common denominator. In this case, it's going to be 20. So I'm going to multiply by 4, and I'm going to multiply by 5. And we end up with 6 and 5/20. And we're going to subtract 8/20. Now you can't take 8 from 5. So you have to borrow from the 6 and make it 5. And I borrowed 1 whole, which is 20/20. So this is really 25/20. Take away 8/20. And 8 from 25 happens to be 17. And the 5 is still there. And we've got 5 and 17/20. Some people would prefer a decimal in this case, and that would be 6.25. And we're going to take away 0.4. And we have a 5, and we borrow. 4 from 12 is 8, and 5. This happens to be the same as that, so it doesn't matter. I assume you could put either one, but I'm going to go ahead and put the 5 and 17/20ths in there. Shall we do the decimal this time? Why not? -1/4, and I'm going to subtract it from 5.5. That's actually 5.50, which is 0.25, 5.25, and we're done. Let's see if it likes a decimal in this case. It may. Okay. It allows you to change. It's a -4.5. And a minus, sorry, that 4 isn't very good looking there. There we go. 8.8. We got a 3, carry the 1, and a 13.3, and it's negative. And, 1.5. I'll just put it in. Sure you're tired of waiting for me. Let me get rid of this real quick. Sorry. There we go. I've got a double negative, so that really is an addition going on there. So shall we use decimals? That would be 8.5, and I've got a negative 8.6. Interesting. Well, the difference between these is 0.1, and we're talking about negative 0.1. That's one way to get my answer. Let's go ahead and try this another way. Let's write -8 3/5, and let's add 8 5/10. And we have to multiply by 2 to get a common denominator. And we have got -6/10 and +5/10. The -8s cancel, the -8 cancels with the 8. This is -6/10 plus 5/10, which is -1/10. And these, of course, are equal. It doesn't matter which way you put it in. That's -4.5. And, we've got two negatives. So we've got -6.75 and a -8.5, and we're adding them together. Notice that I put the extra 0 there just to make it easier. That's a 2, carry the 1, and it looks like it's 15, and it's negative. Two more negatives. We'll do it in fractional form this time, 7 3/5. And we're going to add the -1/4. We need 20ths. In this case, I'm going to multiply by 5. And in this case, times 4. So we've got 12 and 5 makes 17/20. And it's -7 17/20. And a double negative, -6.6. I'm alternating, so I'm going to make that a -1.5. And we'll add them up. That's -8.1. That was a carry, by the way. That's 11. That's a 1. The decimals line up. I carried the 1, and I have an 8 over there. -8.1. Decimals are definitely the easy way to go here. We've got -8.625, and 1/5 is a 0.2. And notice that we're taking a difference here, but the negatives win. This positive 0.2 takes away the decimal, 2 decimal points from here. Lots of ways of thinking about it, but there you have it. And double negative means that we're adding. So I've got a 4.2. Oh, I did a decimal already. Oh, well, it's okay. This is addition, 4.25, which is 8.45. And I've been doing decimals, but decimals are so much easier. Let's do decimals. 7.20. I'm going to put the 0 in there, and I'm going to add 1.25. Now, I do have a negative in the top, so this is really what's being subtracted from that. But it's easier if you subtract from the larger number. So I'm going to borrow, and 5 from 10 is 5, and 2 from 11 is 9, and 1 from 6 is 5. Now this would be correct, except that the negatives win. Negative 5.95. And we're done. Okay. Good luck for you. Remember common denominators, or change your fractions and rational numbers to decimals. It's a lot easier sometimes. Good luck.